And we are live. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessper Maquindang. Thank you for tuning in. If you're here to build a stronger team and a more effective culture, you're in the right place. In each episode, we have guests that share highlights, tips, and insights to help you and your people thrive. And today, we have a special guest. And as we welcome our guest, let's learn more about Matthew Roth. Develop, Matthew Roth, developing others has become the guiding principle in Matthew's career. With an executive master's in leadership degree from the University of Southern California, fight on, and over 30 years working in the emergency fields of fire, emergency medical services, and law enforcement, Matthew's strength is people. As a leadership coach, adjunct professor, supervisor, board member, and business owner, Matthew takes value in helping others identify their own aspirations, building a plan to achieve their own greatness. Failure begets learning. Learning develops wisdom. Matthew embraces the idea that he has failed greatly, but then again, gained so many learning opportunities from it. Let's welcome Matthew Roth. Matthew, how are you?
I'm good, Jessper. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Matthew, I'm super excited about today's conversation about taking care of your people. Let's dig into the research. Tell me more about the research in your field.
My research first began through a master instructor program. I was going through the state of California, and I was researching leadership development. How do we develop our next generation of millennial leaders? So I did a lot of research, talked to a lot of subject matter experts, and that was almost 10 years ago now. So staying current with what is occurring with those millennial leaders and how they're being developed, current studies are showing that 69% of millennials do not feel that they are being led. They don't feel that they're getting good leadership development themselves. And then when you couple that with additional research that says 53% of millennials aren't afraid to leave their job. That's a concern for companies. That's a concern for businesses when you have a 50% potential retention issue. So what are we doing to make those steps to help those millennials be developed as leaders themselves?
On that note, I was looking at some of the research in the field as well, and I found a couple of stats from Gallup, and I wanted to get your perspective. The first stat I found is that 70% of the employee experience is shaped by their manager. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. Most people don't leave the jobs because of the job. They leave the job for who they work for. People leave managers. They don't leave their jobs. They may love the job. They may love the people they're with, but that management conflict is always there. And when it comes down to it, it's people. How do we work with, integrate, lead, develop, and guide our people? And people have to know you care. Maya Angelou said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that's such a salient point that we forget sometimes.
That's such a memorable quote. And the other stat I found from Gallup is only 1 in 4 employees feel that their employer cares about their well-being. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I read a similar quote from Deloitte, and it was something to the effect of 95% of leaders and managers believe that they care about their employees' well-being. If you ask them, they would say, "Yeah, of course I do." And when those workers are asked, 50%. So your research said 25, Deloitte says 50%. So half of your employees don't feel you care about them. If you don't care about them, why should I work for you? Why would I do above and beyond? If that employee feels that way, you're not getting the most out of that employee. Where conversely, the other 50% that does feel you care about them, man, they're going to give you everything they got. And they're going to be loyal, and they're going to be productive. They're going to be innovative, and they're going to be all into your organization.
On a similar note, one more stat that I wanted to share, and this comes from LinkedIn, and they found that 94% of employees say they would stay longer at a company if only they invested more in their development. Your perspective?
I think that's valid. At the end of the day, we are very myopic beings. People care about themselves. And as developmental of yours, as thoughtful as we are of other people, at the end of the day, how much am I making? How much can I provide for my family? What's my work-life balance? And if that's not being met, people will go somewhere else.
Just some interesting research in this field. And let's take a deeper dive. I'd like to know Matthew, your personal journey, what inspired you to really jump into this world of taking care of people, especially in our work environment?
Oh, taking care of people, I think, goes way back. I think that's what started my journey to become a paramedic. I always enjoyed taking care of people. As I transitioned into law enforcement, it was the same way. We in law enforcement, we in EMS and fire, we like taking care of people. That's why it's the ethics that people have to take care of people. As I started progressing through my career and being mentored by some leaders or not being mentored by leaders and not feeling that same sense of nobody's pouring into me, made me start researching this. And that's how some of my research and that training started to come about. That I didn't feel I was being developed at that point. I didn't feel my skills. I didn't have maybe that leader that I felt I needed to grow, which is what took me to that master instructor program where I research is, which what took me to USC and being in that EML program, which was transformational to say the least. We're really looking in the mirror going, oh my goodness, what a failed leader I have been. How many mistakes I have made. There were books in some of that coursework that were just fundamentally changing me as a leader. And a lot of what I say, I think in the bio you read was, no, a lot of what I coach with people now are from my mistakes. They're not from my successes. Things I've learned now from mistakes in the past.
That's a great point. As you've mentioned, failure provides more opportunities for learning. And when people make mistakes, it's these opportunities to really learn, grow, and develop. So that is an excellent point.
Indeed.
And let's take a deeper dive into the topic. Matthew, tell me more about why people should pay more attention to this idea of taking care of our people, our coworkers, our employees, our team.
Servant leadership was a term. There's so many leadership styles out there, right? Servant leadership is probably still currently one of the best leadership styles out there that corporate is jumping onto. It's the reverse pyramid idea, very, very functional. But at the base of that, there's a concept that was shared with us. It's called love leadership, right? Well, what's love? Love's a verb. It's an action. Are you loving your employees? Are you loving your future leaders that you're developing? Love can sometimes mean discipline. I'm going to write you up so you don't end your career with what you're doing. Those types of discipline. And I remember early in my leadership journey, kind of feeling that it was a parental leadership. You know, you don't want to think of being a parent to your children, supervising them, but to a certain extent, there's a validity to that. My toddler, I love differently than my teenager, that I love differently than my adult kids out of the house. The love is constantly changing, right? Your employees are no different. You're not going to give the same direction, focus, or discipline to that new employee in the first 6 months. But when your 6-year employee is making that same mistake, there's a different conversation. And it has to be done in love, and it has to be done in I care about you. What's going on? Like, what? You've never done this before. As much as we try not to cross home life and business life, it overflows. It just does. So how do we show that employee that I care about what's going on in your personal life, but I need you to be here? What tools can I give you in a sincere function, not a transactional way, which sometimes in the HR world, it can be very transactional because we're worried about crossing certain boundaries. And so there's that gap sometimes between HR and management where that can fall short, right? And it's an art. It's an art of how do you dance around that while being empathetic to your employees and truly caring about what's going on in their lives so that they're productive for you instead of just being transactional. Well, hey, fix this so you can come be productive for me.
That's an excellent point. And as we take a deeper dive, there's some questions I had about your field, and I was curious to know, how does caring for our team members directly impact innovation and creativity?
I think people will rise to the occasion. When you give them the tools to function, they want to succeed. People want to be the best they can. If you give them the ability to be innovative and you give them that, this is the task, they might not work as well. I need you to do A and B. or this is what needs to be done, and allow them to have that innovation and that creativity to fix it, they'll surprise you. I may think, man, it's just A to B. They come back with A, B, C, D, E. You're like, wow, I wasn't even thinking that. Great perspective, because we all have different experiences. We all have different ways to bring something. And I think your employees will surprise you when you start giving that control and that leadership for that innovation and creativity.
That's an excellent point. And how do we ensure that everyone feels cared for, not just our top performers, but everyone?
I think it's sincerity. I think it's truly caring about your employees. I once had a manager tell me, Matt, you need to take care of this business, not your guys. And no, you take care of the guys. And his perspective was the company comes first. And I'm like, I get that. But if I take care of the guys and I can show them why it's important to take care of the company, now you don't just have me taking care of the company, you have 11 people, because I have 10 other people that are taking care of the company thinking about that. And he couldn't wrap himself around that. I mean, it was a high level executive that I was working with. His perspective, again, historically was, if you're taking care of the guys, you're covering for them. You're hiding their misfortunes instead of, having the mindset of company first. And my perspective was always, no, I think I do have the company first, because I now have 11 people that are cheerleaders for this organization, that are customer service oriented, that are putting the customer first. But if they don't feel they're being taken care of, they're not going to take care of the customers. So that was always my perspective on how functional leadership goes. And you empower them to be mindful of the company's priorities, be mindful of that citizen or that customer that they're taking care of. Customers aren't always right. It's interesting when you start looking into some of things. Richard Branson, J.W. Marriott, take care of your people, they'll take care of you. Very common themes that you start seeing these hugely successful leaders and organizations have the same philosophies.
That people first culture. That's an excellent point. And on that note, based on your experiences seeing other leaders, working with other leaders, what are some values that leaders should embrace?
I really think that love leadership concept comes first. Take care of your employees so they'll take care of you. And not you managerially, but you as the business, right? They're the face of the organization. Those frontline people are the first people your customers, your clients, your citizens are engaging with. So how do we show them that leadership concept? It comes back to servant leadership, love leadership, parental leadership, whatever term you want to use it. It comes back to love, loving one another. It's, there was a wise man 2,000 years ago who said the greatest of these is love, right? Well, when we realize that love's not an emotion, it's an action. People need to know that you care about them. People need to feel that you care about their needs, and they will produce for you tenfold.
On this concept of love leadership and supporting others, how do we create an environment where people feel safe to speak up when things are not going well?
That's cultural. I think we've seen Peter Drucker talk about that ad nauseum, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. I think culture is driven from the top down. And if you have a manager or a leader who doesn't feel that, you're going to get shut down. I remember one of the best books that really was transformational for me was What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And there was a CEO that didn't give the time to people to talk. Well, then people would stop talking. They're not going to give you that heads up when you go to take a step through the elevator, down the elevator shaft, because the elevator wasn't there, right? Because you don't want to hear what they said. You are too busy for them. You don't care about them. People aren't going to help you. So it's a cultural shift that takes time. And I think a lot of that happens in transitions with organizations when there's a leadership change. So I believe that culture is slow to change, but it can be changed over time, and depending on what that is set by leaders.
Speaking of that cultural shift, how do we respond when a leader walks up to us and says, Matthew, this caring people, all fun and dandy, but we don't have time or the budget for that. How do we respond to that?
Yeah, no, that's just being a human being, right? You pull up to the gas station, you get that uncomfortable feeling because the person there is begging for money. Say good morning. That's an act of love and kindness, of just being a human being. There is no money or training into that. It's called ethics. It's called being a good person. Most organizations want to hire good people. That's not just a civil service thing. Businesses want to hire good people. So I don't think there's a lot of money and training that goes into that. It's truly a cultural shift. Are you truly caring about your employees who will truly care about the people they're serving? And most businesses have a service element to them. You're providing some type of service and bringing money in for that. So I don't think it's a money thing. I think it's a cultural shift, and it's something that we embody and share with others.
Excellent. And then on this topic of that love, leadership, and supporting others, what's the best way to lead with care when we're delivering tough feedback or having difficult conversations? How do we maintain that level of support?
Yeah, that's where I go back to that parental leadership. And that's not a popular concept when we think about parenting. But if you're disciplining, why do we discipline our children? Because we care about them. Johnny, you can't steal cookies from the cookie jar, because if we don't discipline them, when they're 16, Johnny's stealing a car and doesn't understand that stealing is not correct in society. So we're loving Johnny by disciplining him for stealing that cookie, right? I don't want to hurt my child. I love my child, right? The same thing goes in that employee sense. If we're truly loving our employees, hey, you can't drive your car that fast. You're going to get into an accident. Then you get into an accident. Hey, we talked about you driving fast. Now you got into an accident. I'm going to write you up. This written documentation is not because we're mad at you. It's not because we're angry. It's not because you're failing, but this is a failure, and we need to learn from this. So going back to our discussion a couple months ago, slow down. That will get you to not crashing. That makes you have a long career for 30 or 40 years in this life. And that analogy of driving fast can be anything in the corporate setting or in the business world as well. But when we have to have that courageous conversation, disciplining people is not fun. It's the worst part about being a leader. We always want to give the attaboys. The discipline in that courageous conversation to tell somebody what they're doing is not good for them, or what they're doing is not good for the organization. It takes a strong leader to be able to have that. But if the leader has that concept of, I'm doing this in love, right? Because I care about you, because I care about your future in this organization, that helps with that delivery process in that courageous conversation.
That's an excellent point. And moments of reflection for leaders. When it comes to taking care of our people, what types of questions should leaders ask when thinking about this?
Leaders ask their subordinate, clarify that for me.
Or themselves when they're reflecting.
I think leaders have to always introspectively look at yourself. If you don't know yourself, it's hard for you to lead others. I think there was a lot of development in that. Like, what kind of leader are you? If you embrace this love leadership mindset, this servant leadership mindset, you start realizing, okay, well, what would I want to hear if I'm on that receiving end of that courageous conversation? How would I want that to be delivered? Many, many times leaders have the opportunity to think about that before that person gets called into the office. So there's time for them to reflect and decide, how does that person want to leave it? We talk about the golden rule versus the platinum rule. You first have to look inside. How would I want to hear that, right? That's the golden rule. How do I want to hear that? And then I go, oh, this is Jessper. I know Jessper. He may want to hear it this way. So it's a step above. The good leaders will take that next step for that platinum rule and not just think, how do I want to hear it? Well, how does Jessper want to hear this? And how can I approach it? I know this is very important to him culturally, historically, whatever I know about my employee, and deliver it that way. Where the disconnect, I think, occurs is the leaders not knowing their employees. Well, if you don't know them, do you love them? How do you show that love if you're not knowing your employees? That's where I think that drop off is. So that constant interaction with people and not being fake. Hey, all the kids, all the babies. People can smell fake a mile away, right? But sincerely talking to somebody regularly in those office interactions lets people know you care. So when that conversation comes, the good leader will say, how am I going to feel? How would I feel in that person's shoes? But the great leaders start going, how would that person want to receive it, right? So those are the introspective questions I think leaders need to ask themselves in those courageous conversations.
Excellent. And I actually wanted to go back to a point that you brought up earlier. And I hear this in many leadership conversations, the idea of effective parenting and effective leadership From your perspective, what do they have in common?
It sounds to be the theme, but it's love, right? If you're truly loving, loving's a verb, right? I'm not spanking you because I'm mad at you. I'm not spanking you because I hate you. It's a love action. I know spanking's frowned upon in some circles nowadays, but there's an effective reason we are disciplined historically. This is why discipline works. Discipline's designed to correct a behavior, not punish, but correct a behavior. Again, I've been on the receiving end of that. I've had my closed door meetings. I've had supervisors literally tell me, Matt, I love you. This is why I'm saying this. Didn't understand it at the time, how to get navigated through that. But but you realize that afterwards. No, they did. They were taking care of me. They did realize I was going down the wrong path of driving too fast, talking, whatever that issue was. So I think the model of that parental leadership is really founded in love.
Excellent. And actually, let me see if this shows. We have a comment from LinkedIn, and Angela says, we spend a tremendous amount of time at work. Workplace culture profoundly influences our well-being, particularly mental health. Employers that prioritize wellness and mental health, they not only benefit individual employees, but also enhance team dynamics, support families, empower communities, and contribute to a healthier society overall. Individually, prioritizing mental wellness and practicing self-care also contributes to a culture of well-being, benefiting ourselves and those around us. Matthew, want to get your thoughts?
100%. Couldn't agree more. When you're hiring somebody or retaining somebody, you're not hiring that person to just be at work. You're hiring the complete package. When that person comes to work and their work life, their mom is in the hospital, their wife is not doing well, they're sick, their children are sick, that person is coming to work. Employers have to understand that mental health side of things affects our day-to-day work. So being able to reach out to that person, hey, you seem off today, Angela. Is there anything I can do? What's going on? And that's, I think, where that divide with HR, because HR says, don't get too personal. Don't ask them about things. I think we need to bridge that gap. The good leaders do bridge that gap. One of my best supervisors when I was a kid coming up in the world, he was like, yeah, you need a mental health. They take it off. Like, I want you to be good mental clarity when you're here. If you just had a big fight with your wife before you came to work, you're not going to make good decisions for me today. I'd rather you stay at home. Probably the only supervisor that told me that, because most supervisors they just want the body there. They just want somebody in that seat. And so the idea of mental health and being conscious of that as a leader is important. It's not soft and squishy, fluffy stuff where, it's hugs and kisses every day, because obviously HR has to have that line, but it is being empathetic and loving to your employees' needs when you notice that, hey, they're a little off from where they were yesterday, a little off from where they were last week. And striking that balance of getting too personal, like maybe people don't want to share their medical issues, but opening that conversation to where they might want to. It's definitely an art. It's definitely a balance. But I think her concept on taking care of people's mental health is huge.
Excellent. Thank you, Matthew. On your perspective, we have another question from LinkedIn and from Natalie Runoff. What is your suggestion on firing with care?
Jim Collins wrote a book, Good to Great. And I think there's a lot of value in putting the right person on the right bus, heading in the right direction. Right person, right bus, right direction. Sometimes we have people in positions that they're just not meant for. And that's that courageous conversation. If you have to be fired, typically firing somebody is based on performance. I would love to get ahead of that conversation to where we don't have to fire you. But ultimately, when we have to fire somebody, it's because of choices they've made. And so those are the conversations that have to be honest and direct, that, hey, we've had this conversation. We've tried to correct this. We've given you training. We've given you this. At this point, you're no longer needed at this location. And it's with love. Is there anything we can do to get you going? I'm happy, maybe it's something that you can write them a letter of recommendation to another job. They're just not a good fit at your organization. Maybe it's somebody you can't give a letter to, but being able to offer those things as you are letting them out the door. But again, I think ultimately my goal is to try to not fire them. I want to try and correct that behavior before we have to fire them. But I think, Natalie, if you're at the point where you have to fire them, how would you want to be treated if you were fired? You look back and say, how do I want to hear this? And then if you happen to know that employee, how are they going to want to hear this? And nobody wants to hear it. So finding those words to break to them in a caring, empathetic manner, but also direct and firm that, no, we're not keeping you. It's definitely a balance. And it's something you have to think about ahead of time before that conversation.
Thank you, Matthew, for your insights, and thank you, Natalie, for the question. We do have another comment from Angela, and she says, while HR's involvement is valuable, our goal should be to empower managers with the tools and confidence to navigate these sensitive conversations effectively. Equipping them with practical guidance and communication strategies not only builds their leadership skills, but also promotes a culture of trust and early support across the organization. Matthew, I want to get your thoughts.
Words coming out of my mouth. I agree with her 100%. But that last line is the key. That culture of trust. This doesn't happen overnight. The culture is going to take time to spread within the organization. You have to empower your managers to have those conversations. And a lot of times those difficult conversations are passed on to the newest employee because the old wise supervisor doesn't want to have the conversation either. It's not a fun conversation. So we have to empower that young leader, newer leader, how to do that. We have to give those tools. But going back to culture is paramount. We have to have successful organizations have a culture of trust within that organization, a culture that I can walk into my supervisor's office and say, hey, this isn't working, and here's why. And we call that the open door policy. Every manager probably will say on the test, I have an open door policy, but do they really? Is that a transparent conversation? So that culture of trust within an organization is what facilitates those top tier leaders to be able to continue empathetically leading.
Excellent. Thank you, Angela and Matthew, for sharing your insights on this. We do have another comment, and it is from Brandon Burbank. Awesome interview. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Jessper and Matthew. Mental health impacts so many of our lives. Matthew, did you want to share any other insights on mental health?
And I was just having that conversation with some colleagues this weekend and how important mental health is in our professions. And it's just starting to come to the surface where organizations are starting to realize it. We really feel that they're scratching the surface and it's not really as comprehensive as it could be. Mental health issues over time occur a lot of the time because those employees are not feeling valued. Those employees are not feeling loved in that organization. Experiences that have happened, obviously dealing mainly in the public sector, we see a lot of violence. We see a lot of trauma. Those are cumulative effects that affect us over time that might not be as impactful as a Starbucks organization. But mental health is multifaceted. It could be work-related, but our mental health from our home can also affect work. I think we discussed that. So I think mental health is starting to become more accepted, and we're discussing that where it used to be very superficial or very distant. There was a very distinct break in that. So I think the more comfortable we get with mental health topics and discussions, I don't need to know what medication you're on, but I know you're off today, right? What can I do to help you? Where are you at? Do you need to go home? Okay. Or can I help? Can you work through this? And can we help facilitate and modify some of your work today? That's an empathetic leader. I don't need to just send you home because maybe that's not the best thing for you either. I just lost my mom. I don't want to go home and think about that. I want to be at work, right? But maybe I need to adjust my workload today. And that leader that sees that, those are important steps. And those are the leaders and managers that we remember.
Excellent. Thank you, Brandon, for sharing your kind words. And thank you, Matthew, for sharing your insights on this. And one more question for our deep dive. And I was curious to know, Matthew, what advice would you give to a new leader who wants to build this culture of care?
Don't be afraid to ask questions. Find a mentor. Read, study, look at people you respect and emulate that, but also don't be afraid to have that conversation. If you want to be that leader that cares, you probably have a leader in mind that cared about you. So build off what that was to be the best leader you can be. don't be a mirror image of that person. Be sincere in who you are to be that transformational leader that you are developing to become.
Excellent. And Matthew, as we wrap up, what is the best way to reach you for people who want to learn more about your work and your field?
You can reach me via email at matt@libertytreelnd.com. Or my phone number is 406-214-9738.
And Matthew, before we go, what is your final piece of wisdom for our audience?
Human capital is the most important thing we have in any organization. Your people are important. If you want your best success for your organization.
Excellent. Our people are important. And to everyone out there, thank you again for tuning in. We hope you found valuable insights. And if you know any leaders who could benefit from these ideas, advice, and insights, feel free to share this conversation with them. And last but not least, want to thank Matthew again for joining me today. Really enjoyed our conversation. And to everyone out there, thank you again for tuning in. I'll see you again on the next show.
Thank you, Jessper. Been an honor.